You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m, join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons? I don't believe in prisons. I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance.
Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's just gone 6. I'm Michelle Dewberry and this is Dewbs & Co, the show where we'll get into some of the things that have got us talking today. Now, there seems to be a lot of gearing up, doesn't there, in preparation for the next general election. The parties selecting their candidates who are going to face the general public to represent them. Well, it's spawned a conversation, so it has, in London about whether or not Jeremy Corbyn should be allowed to stand to represent Labour in the next general election. Some are saying they need him there, otherwise basically he'll wipe the floor with them all as an independent anyway. Others are saying no way. Brand Corbyn is bad for brand Labour. Which is it? You tell me. And firefighters, the vote's cast, it's all done dusted. They will currently be going on strike if they don't get a pay rise. I have to say, I do not believe that firefighters should be able to even go on strike in this country. Am I wrong? Do you wholeheartedly support them in their quest for more dosh if it means that fires could be left unattended? And should we be sending fighter jets to Ukraine? According to the thorn in Rishi Sunak's side, aka Boris Johnson, yes, we should. Do you agree with him? And yes, it is Friday, which means I want to end my show with something a little bit different tonight. Do not worry, it's not a striptease. It's tea time after all, but it'll be something a little bit different, fun nonetheless. But for now, let's bring ourselves up to speed with tonight's latest headlines.
Good evening, it's 3 minutes past 6. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. Lancashire police investigating the disappearance of a missing mother now believe she fell into the River Wire. Nicola Bully disappeared a week ago while walking her dog. The investigation is focusing on a 10-minute window that's unaccounted for. The 45-year-old's phone was found on a bench, still connected to a work Teams meeting with her dog nearby, but no trace of her has been found. Superintendent Sally Riley confirmed officers have searched a 1 kilometre radius from that location and 15 kilometres of water from the River Wire to the sea.
Our main working hypothesis, therefore, is that Nicola has sadly fallen into the river, that there is no third party or criminal involvement, and that this is not suspicious, but a tragic case of a missing person. This is particularly important because speculation otherwise can be really distressing for the family and for Nicola's children.
Nicola's partner, Paul Ansell, says he's focusing on staying strong for their two daughters and hopes people will come forward with new information.
Every single scenario comes to a brick wall, every single one of them. And then all we're doing is sitting there going round and round and round, going through every scenario, and then go back to the first scenario again and do the whole thing again. And it's just all day long. That's all we're doing. That's all we're doing.
Disgraced pop star Gary Glitter's been freed from jail after serving half of his 16-year sentence for sex offences. The 79-year-old was jailed in 2015 for sexually abusing 3 schoolgirls. The sex offender, who left a low-security prison in Dorset, will now be subject to licence conditions. A man who brought a crossbow to Windsor Castle with the intention of harming Queen Elizabeth has pleaded guilty to charges under the Treason Act. Jaswant Singh Chahal told a protection officer he was here to kill the Queen after breaking into the castle grounds on Christmas Day in 2021. The 21-year-old was wearing a mask and was carrying a loaded weapon with the safety catch released. The late Queen was in residence at the time. The Royal College of Nursing's joined ambulance workers in Wales in cancelling planned strikes for next week, following new pay offers from the Welsh Government. Rail services, though, have been disrupted today. Train drivers are walking out for the second time this week. RMT and ASLEF union members are demanding better pay and better conditions. Rail operators say there are severe delays, with no trains running at all in some areas. The General Secretary of ASLEF, Mick Whelan, says the union wants talks to continue to find a solution.
Quite deceitfully, the RDG put out a protocol which they led for a pay offer over 2 years that hadn't been discussed with this trade union, hadn't been through the framework agreement that we'd agreed with them to allow some sort of national talks to take place in our fractionalised industry, and it's probably set the whole process back months and months. If they want to negotiate via the media, I'll tell you what I want, and then you can relay it to them. They can come and talk to us in a few weeks' time. But we don't behave like that. We behave honourably. So we'll go back into talks on Tuesday in the hope that trust can be rebuilt and we can find a way forward.
The US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, has postponed his trip to China after a suspected spy balloon was tracked flying across the country. China says the balloon was, in fact, a civilian airship which had deviated from its planned route. It was spotted over Montana, close to a US nuclear Air Force base. Blinken was to depart tonight, and his visit to China, the first by a top US diplomat for years, comes at a time of increasingly strained relations between the countries. China has issued an apology. And the FTSE 100 has closed at a record high as concerns over rising global inflation and interest rates ease. It was briefly trading at 79.06 or 7,906 points earlier, the highest level seen for nearly 5 years. It has been put down to investors hoping global inflation is easing, leading to a stronger demand in the stock markets. It's also been supported by a drop in the pound against the dollar and an easing of COVID restrictions in China. TV online and DAB Plus Radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Dewbs & Co.
Thanks for that. Well, I'm Michelle Dewbs and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock tonight. If you're sitting there thinking to yourself, I want to watch Michelle, but I also want to go to the pub or I need to go get my kids or whatever it is, do not worry, because you can take us with you. If you haven't already, you should listen to us on the radio, DAB+. You can find us GB News. Take us with you on your Friday night out if you're going out very soon. Keeping me company in the studio, though. They're not going out. They're here talking to me about what's been going on. We've got the political commentator Benedict Spence and the author, fireman and trade unionist Paul Embry. Good evening, gents.
Good evening.
Lots of you already writing in about my outfit. Liz is saying, Michelle, please can you start telling us where you get your clothes from? I can't, Liz, because I'm so tight. I never throw my old clothes away, so most of my clothes are so old now, you probably only find them in a charity shop. But
I'm very... CNA on the label there, by the way.
CNA, that's showing your age. CNA is not even a thing, I don't think, in the UK anymore, is it?
Is it not?
There's not any comments about your two those outfits, which is disappointing
But
me
they haven't seen-
greatly.
They'll come. You did the intro. We didn't do the intro.
This
They've only
is a
just
very
seen it.
good point, because one of the points that I wanted to reflect upon tonight is I thought you two look very smart.
Well, that's very kind.
They've made a nice effort tonight, haven't they, these two gentlemen? I await an influx now of everyone across the nation.
Because we're both out afterwards. It's Friday night, we're going out. We want to look our best.
Up for
Together,
us.
we've got a date.
Together.
Very much so.
No judgment on Dewbs and Co. You can have dates all you like, we don't judge. Get in touch with all your thoughts tonight. I want to talk to you about Labour and Corbyn. Firefighters, do you think they should go on strike? I've just mentioned I've got one of them sat next to me. I'm sure he'll have very strong opinions either way on that one. Also, as well, have a little bit of fun at the end of the programme tonight. It's Friday after all. So all of that to come. But should we get stuck into the Labour Party situation then? Because, of course, we've got a general election coming up in probably about a year or so's time, give or take. A conversation then is turning to who should stand and represent the parties, in particular in the Labour Party. Jeremy Corbyn, remember him? Well, he represents, and he has done for the best part of about 40 years, actually, Islington North. He's lost his whip after saying that allegations of anti-Semitism were exaggerated. Paul Embry, I'll come to you first on this one. You are a Labour member, is that right?
Correct.
Do you think that he should be able to stand as a Labour candidate in the next general election?
Yeah, I think he should. I don't think a strong enough case has been made for him not to stand, frankly. I mean, look, Jeremy Corbyn is a Marmite figure, both inside the Labour movement and beyond. You have to recognise he led the party to its worst defeat since the 1930s, but equally is a long-serving and very dedicated member of the Labour Party and the Labour movement. Extremely popular, for right or wrong, in his constituency. I mean, he's won every election. He's stood in Islington North by a comfortable margin. And I think the problem for the Labour Party, really, is if they don't allow him, if they don't restore the whip, don't allow him to stand as a candidate, then I think there's a very good chance he'll stand as an independent. And I think he'll win as an independent. I think he'll defeat the Labour candidate in Islington North, whoever that would be.
See, I'm not so sure, because albeit he's got a very strong track record, he's very loved, he's very prominent in his constituency. Benedict, Paul's saying that he thinks he would win if he stood as an indie, but I think what would happen is that Keir Starmer and the Labour activists would kind of rally around and go, look, this is our chance, our opportunity to get the Tories out. Don't choose person over party, because that could be the deciding vote against a majority.
Potentially. I do think he should stand as an independent and give it a go if he really does back himself that he himself is the reason why he keeps getting elected as Labour leader and not just the colour of his... as the Labour candidate, and not just the colour of his rosette, then he should back himself in that situation and possibly shouldn't be petitioning to be let back into the Labour Party to do it, because obviously his point is that he was wrongly got rid of and that there was a campaign against him, and he needs to be able to show that actually he can stand on his own 2 feet and that he's not riding on the coattails.
I worked for 20 years in Islington. I know the area really well.
Doing what?
As a firefighter at Islington Fire Station, and Jeremy Corbyn used to come and stand on our picket line, incidentally. And whenever you were in his company, you could see how popular he was. I mean, he got the sort of reception among his constituents that I guess a lot of MPs are not used to. I think a lot of MPs would probably get quite a bit of criticism if they walked around their constituency, but he was treated as a bit of a hero in Islington North. He's got that real connection with people. Whatever you think of him, he's got that connection with people. And I suspect what it might be, I mean, you say you don't think he would win, but I mean, I think back to the London mayor election when the Labour Party did a similar thing with Ken Livingstone, and they stopped him through various manoeuvres from being the Labour candidate for mayor in 2000. And they put Frank Dobson in as a Labour candidate. Instead, Livingstone stood as an independent and swept the board because people felt that this was a complete stitch-up. And I suspect very strongly in Islington North it would be a similar scenario.
You see, when you talk about Corbyn, like if I was to talk about Corbyn to one of my brothers, my youngest brother actually, who loves Jeremy Corbyn, he would say to me, the thing with Jeremy Corbyn is, Michelle, he's amazing, but you don't realise it because the media ran a very successful smear campaign against him.
Yeah, no, I get that. I do hear that a lot, that he's Jesus and that everybody's just against him. And actually, all the evidence doesn't suggest that he's a particularly intelligent politician. He's just somebody who has a certain set of principles that are actually great with a core demographic in the Labour Party itself. Actually, he might be very popular in his constituency, but certain constituencies do tend towards slightly different politics. I mean, there are several constituencies in London, several on Merseyside, that tend to return slightly more out-there candidates than other places do. But actually, I think Keir Starmer's got to look at this slightly more broadly. He really is a Marmite figure, as you say, Jeremy Corbyn. He's also a threat to Keir Starmer's authority. If he's able to sort of say things that are potentially anti-Semitic or not and get away with it, then that is a challenge to his authority. Keir Starmer also has to be able to turn around to the country and say, I'm not bringing you a government of cranks. I'm not bringing you people who are going to start mouthing off about Israel when what people want to know about is, can they turn their electricity on? He needs to be able to do that. And I think if you have people like Jeremy Corbyn back at the forefront of the whole thing, then there are going to be seats that the Labour Party lost at the last general election that a lot of people who might otherwise vote Labour might go, it's the same group of people. It's the same group of people I didn't vote for last time because I thought they couldn't be trusted, and they're still here. And, it doesn't matter that Keir Starmer says things have changed. Corbyn's still there, XYZ, they're still there, they're still spouting off, and I don't trust them enough, not necessarily to vote Tory, but to give them my vote this time around. And I think that would be the fear, that enough slightly cranky candidates might come forward for Labour to turn enough voters off them.
I can hear my brother, well, I can't actually because he's travelling at the moment, but I could hear him if he was watching tonight. He'd be shouting at the screen and he would be saying, see, this is what people in the media do. They call Jeremy Corbyn a crank, or they allude to him to being some kind of crank. He would argue, people like my brother would argue, that the establishment, if I can use that word, Paul, were threatened by Corbyn because he stood to overturn the status quo. He really wanted radical change, whether it was nationalisation, whatever it was. He was really going to, if he got in and followed his promises, he was going to get a hold of this country and change it, whether for good or bad, we can debate, but he would have changed it. And a lot of people were fearful of that.
I think that's partly true. I mean, there's no question that if you get a radical candidate from the left in this country who looks like they might take power, then I think elements of the establishment and the media will inevitably try to do that person down to make sure that that doesn't happen, that they don't win power. But equally, the idea that the only reason that the Labour Party lost so heavily in 2019 was because the media were anti-Corbyn, I think is just fanciful. The Labour Party have been losing the working class vote in this country since 2000 under Tony Blair. The trajectory was only going in one way. And the truth is, however popular Corbyn was in certain quarters amongst the demographic, the young, the city-based.
Yeah, like my brother's kind of...
Yeah, and to a certain degree, the urban middle class and whatever. The key question, I think, for any Labour Party leader, could I go into a pub in Stoke-on-Trent and feel at home? Would people warm to me? Would people see me as one of them? Now, I don't think Corbyn could do that.
You think Starmer could?
No, I don't think Starmer can do it.
He got chucked out
I
of
don't think Starmer pretends that he can, though. That's the thing. I don't think he's pretending to be a man of the people. He's there to fix, he's there to steady the ship. And I actually think in many ways he wasn't expecting to be doing anywhere near this well when he was given the brief that fell into his lap. He was expecting it to be a sort of a clawing back job. Now he's looking potentially at a majority and he's thinking, well, let's not ruin this now, chaps. Let's not, fumble it right at the death.
But to Paul's point, he needs those people in the men, whatever, in the pubs of Stoke-on-Trent and all the rest of it, doesn't he? He has to appeal to those people.
Yeah, but you know who he doesn't have to appeal to?
Who?
The people on the far right, the far left, sorry, because they will probably end up going for a Labour candidate anyway. There aren't really alternatives for them. It's not like the Tories where you have every now and then you have UKIP or the Brexit Party or Reform and there are insurgencies. You'll get a few people who will go for the Lib Dems, but probably not that many, and they'll probably do that tactically in seats where Labour are less likely to win. The average person who is hard left will probably end up voting Labour in seats where it matters. Starmer doesn't need to worry about those people's votes.
At the same time, and I've been a big critic of Corbynism over recent years, but at the same time, I do not want to see a Labour Party which is exclusively a sort of liberal, centrist, Blairite Labour Party. I think becoming that party actually helped to bring about the rupture between the party and the working class. I do think we need to look at some of the elements which Corbyn did introduce, particularly in terms of trying to build a new economic model, which did resonate
do you
quite
actually
well.
think, though, that that's what you're going to get with Keir Starmer?
Which did resonate well in many red wall constituencies.
I mean, Keir Starmer is promising to nationalise the entire energy sector of this country. That doesn't strike me as particularly Blairite. That strikes me as quite left-wing. When he's talking about great British energy, it's going to be this green revolution, and the idea is to bring it into state control. There's no other way of putting that. That's the long-term plan.
I don't think he's talking about national
well, he's not using that language, but that is the plan.
That is
absolutely the plan, is to bring it back into national hands, which is not necessarily unsensible when you look at how, for example, Norway or Russia, their energy industries are able to provide great amounts of revenue for public services or the military.
It's certainly true that I think the whole kind of phenomenon of Corbynism did push the Labour Party on economics, at least, to the left. And I don't think that was necessarily a bad thing, because however much Corbyn didn't resonate as a personality on the doorstep in some of the sort of traditional Labour Northern Heartlands and Midland Heartlands and whatever, some of the stuff around economics, I think, in terms of, a higher minimum wage, closing the gap between rich and poor, more investment in public services, having a proper industrial strategy, all of this kind of stuff. I think that there was a big audience for that, and I think Starmer has probably understood that, and that's probably where some of that policy programme has come from.
I tend to agree with that.
Tony Benn always said, as I said, the Labour Party is like a bird. It needs two wings. It needs its right wing and it needs its left wing to fly. The danger is if the right wing just simply tries to expel the left wing and get rid of it, I don't think that is going to particularly resonate well amongst working class communities. I think it's going to be divisive and disruptive within the Labour movement itself, and it's not the sort of programme you want to go into a general election with.
And Benedict, let's cut to the chase as well. Corbyn, he basically said that the reports of anti-Semitism was basically hyped up a little bit, really, for political reasons and gains. Do you think Corbyn is anti-Semitic?
If so, I believe it to be accidental. I don't think that he's some insidious, evil person. I think this is why I say I don't actually think he's the smartest, the sharpest tool in the box. I think a lot of this is because he's very ideological and he has a worldview, and sometimes it's difficult to sort of, convene that worldview with things like anti-Semitism, which is multifaceted. It's actually a very complex and deep thing. And the problem with that is him turning around and saying he thinks it was slightly hyped up. That, I'm afraid, is part of the problem, because he is perceived as being insensitive towards anti-Semitism. Him brushing it aside and going, oh, it's not that bad, is not him listening. It's not him saying to the Jewish community, I may have messed up, explain to me what I've done wrong and let's talk about it.
But he may genuinely believe that, though, Benedict. He may genuinely believe that some of his opponents inside the Labour Party weaponised the whole issue of anti-Semitism.
Do you think
there is no question that anti-Semitism went up on his watch, and he did nowhere near enough to stop that. And if it's by association, then they're right.
I think that's true, but you could still argue that, yes, it did increase on his watch, but nonetheless some people weaponised it as well. Those two positions are...
I don't think that's necessarily
a
bad.
Do you think he's anti-Semitic?
I genuinely don't know. I don't think there's enough evidence there to conclude that he is, and I can't really make a window into the man's soul. I think he has consorted with people who probably are and hasn't helped himself, but I refuse to say he is without clear evidence.
Well, let's have a look at some of your thoughts at home, shall we? Carol, you certainly will not have a sore bottom from sitting on a fence, because you say, I would welcome him back tomorrow. He talks far more sense than anybody in the party right now, and he was not racist or anti-Semitic. Ivor says, of course, Jeremy Corbyn should be allowed to stand. It's the only chance the Tories have of winning. Carol, I think it's a different Carol. You say, how long do you think Starmer would last as leader if he got into power? I think the left-wing backbenchers would throw him out within a year. Dennis says, Corbyn is a commie, Michelle. If he was in charge, he would let Putin take whatever he wants to. He said before he would love to stop our defence services once and for all. I think what Corbyn is a kind of, he would argue he's on the side of peace. He's quite into things like stop the war and things like that, isn't he? Moira says, I would give Jeremy Corbyn a vote. He's a decent, honest man, not into backhandedness or corruption. Brave man and good for him. Anne, on a completely different tangent, and I like tangents on my show, she says, Paul always reminds me of Vincent van Gogh. Loads of people say that about you when you're on this show. Lots of people do.
It's usually Prince Harry, isn't it? But I think I prefer Van Gogh, actually.
Well...
there's a lot of therapy there either way.
Prince Harry's more lucrative. I would be pushing myself as a Harry lookalike if I was you. You can make a
I'm not sure if you've seen how much Van Goghs go for these days.
Yes,
the ones that
I
don't
know.
have tins of soup on them and paint and stuff. Yeah,
Yeah, but a walking, talking lookalike will push Harry all the way.
Yeah.
Right, going to take a quick break. When I come back, we'll have some of your thoughts. But speaking of Paul, Vincent, Harry, whatever you want to call him, he is indeed a firefighter. I think I'm right in saying you voted to go on strike?
Correct.
Right, well, we'll be getting into that in 2 minutes. Do you think firefighters should be allowed to go on strike in this country? Do you support their quest for more money? Do you think they're hard done by? Give me your thoughts. I'll see you in 2.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance.
Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons? I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Michelle Dewbs and I'm keeping you company on this Friday night till 7 o'clock. Alongside me, the political commentator Benedict Spence and the author, fireman and trade unionist Paul Embry. Lots of you guys have just been getting in touch about that last conversation we've just been having about Jeremy Corbyn. Kevin from Cumbria, he doesn't pull any punches. He says, I love your show, Dewbs, but why do you keep going on about London? The rest of the UK does not care about the madhouse that is inside the M25. Please, can you talk about the UK? I hear you, Kev, not least I'm a northerner myself, but I think the attitude towards Corbyn is quite interesting because for me, it highlights an attitude within the Labour Party, which will be one of the attitudes that could potentially make or break the next election and who would be the Prime Minister of the whole United Kingdom. Speaking of Corbyn, though, Howard says Corbyn is way too old to be running this country. Well, actually, he'd be 75 at the next election. He wouldn't be trying to run the country, of course. Although stranger things have happened, he would just be trying to stand as an MP in Greater Islington. What else? Barry says, you're missing the elephant in the room, Michelle. You're saying loads of young people voted for Corbyn, but that is only because he promised to write off all their student debt. Richard says, please can you all stop referring to the working class? There's no such thing anymore. We've got employees and employers, both of them work. Then we have those of independent means and those who live on state support. The whole idea, he says, of the so-called working class is out of date, is it? I want your thoughts. Carl says, great show tonight. Benedict and Paul are always both reasoned, articulate, and Michelle says, Carl, Paul is definitely the best-looking man on television. There you go. That's a nice compliment from Carl there. Right, let's talk. What about Bennett? Look how
Sat right here, bro.
Yeah. If you're listening to us on the radio, you've followed my advice and you've taken us with you on this Friday night, you will have just missed the devastation, the sheer devastation that appeared on Benedict Spencer's face then when Carl didn't choose him over Paul. Anyway, he'll get over it, I'm sure. Let's talk firefighters then, because they've been balloted, the vote has been cast. Essentially, they will go on strike if they don't manage to get a higher pay offer that they deem appropriate. We don't know the dates yet. Paul Embry, you are indeed. First and foremost, I respect anyone that goes headlong into burning buildings. Got to be honest, wouldn't do it myself, so I absolutely respect those that choose to. But I think it is wrong for you, and not just you, all of you, to go out on force. I think you're emergency service. I think that people will die because of your actions, and I will be quite frank, I think it's quite selfish.
Well, I mean, first of all, what I would say is never underestimate the decision that firefighters take, the anguish that they go through when they withdraw their labour. I've done it previously. It's not something that you ever want to do. It's not a decision that you take lightly. You only do it when you feel you've really been left with no other option. And of course, in withdrawing our labour, we know that our own families, as much as anybody else, are not going to get fire cover in the event that they would need it. So firefighters, in my experience, do think very, very hard before deciding that they're going to walk out on strike. And each local fire and rescue service in this country knows that there's always a possibility a strike should take place. And by law, under the Fire and Rescue Services Act 2004, they're obliged to have a contingency plan in place to make sure that they're still able to provide a service. It's not going to be the service that people are used to, but a service. And obviously there's notice periods when you have to take strike action, so they get proper notice of it.
But Hertfordshire Police, they've been offering people £1,000 to cross the picket lines, preempting the strikes. The unions, your FBU, have come out and called them outrageous, basically, that I'm paraphrasing, I'm putting my word, but that was the essence that they were saying. It was wrong of them to be doing that.
And I think the reason is, Michelle, is, look, some of this money that's and I've seen some of these stories as well, that's being spent on strike breakers, why can't some of that money actually go towards giving firefighters a decent settlement? Because let's be honest, and this is the thing we haven't got onto yet, is it fair that when inflation is, 9, 10, 11%, as it's been over recent months, when firefighters' pay in real terms has gone down by something like £4,000 over the last 10 years, when the starting wage for a firefighter is £11 an hour, just £1.50 above the minimum wage, that people are really in the fire service, as elsewhere, are struggling to make ends meet, where the union has negotiated for months and months trying to get a better offer than the 5% that's on the table, which simply is not adequate.
Yeah, once firefighters are qualified, though, they get above average earnings. And I know my viewers will be shouting at the screens, saying to me, Michelle, loads of firefighters, including your good self, are topping up their earnings with second jobs.
Well, I mean, first of all, most firefighters don't do that simply out of greed. Most firefighters do it because they feel they have to work more hours in order to bring in a better income to provide a decent life for themselves and their families. So it's a financial imperative, I think, for a lot of firefighters, rather than just something that's been driven by pure greed. But you get to a point where you think, look, do we just simply say, when the money on the table, when people in the fire service are struggling to pay their mortgages, their energy bills, and like everybody else, if you take away that right to, the ultimate weapon, if you like, to withdraw your labour, then essentially what you're saying is people should just say, well, that's fine then. I don't have any rights beyond negotiating. The employer has clearly got the whip hand over me, so therefore I'll just suck it up and accept what they're prepared to give me. You get into that situation, then you will see the pay of firefighters and others plummet, because the employers know there's nothing they can ever do in order to drive a better bargain.
Benedict, I could do a back and forth with Paul on this for a fair bit of time, but I'm conscious that you're here, you've got your thoughts as well.
I mean, I agree with you in that I don't think emergency service workers should ever go on strike. I don't think that most medics should go on strike.
Should go on strike or should be allowed to.
Well, this is a tricky thing because it's a question of whether or not we should pass laws preventing them from it. I think that that's a dangerous precedent to set, but I think there should be an understanding.
The prison officers can't go on strike.
I think that there should be an understanding when you join certain professions that you don't go on strike. But with that needs to come an understanding from government on behalf, as the representatives of the people, that they will provide with those services with, I'm not saying spend, the family silver on them, but provide them with the resources they need to allow their members to do their jobs and to live a life that is, is a respectable existence. You can't have it that people are struggling to get food on the table, that sort of thing. So I don't think that you can. I don't think you can have.
Struggle to put food on your
I don't
table
think you can have. I
£38
don't think you can have firefighters necessarily going on strike. But equally, I think the public need to be looking at the government and asking, why is it that they are considering this? Why do they not have them?
£38,000 a year. You're telling me you struggle to put food on your table.
Michelle, firefighters start on £24,000 a year, and then when they become what's called a competent firefighter, they get £32,000 a year. It's a bit more in London because they get London weight in as well. So I suspect.
And do you think you can't afford to eat on £32,000 a year?
Well, we're not just talking about firefighters here. I'm also talking about emergency service workers, and we hear lots of stories about things like nurses, for example, who are unable to feed their families for myriad different reasons. Now, that's one set of circumstances.
I need to push back against
but equally,
this. I need to push back against it, Benedict.
Go on.
What happens is people say sentences like that. Nurses can't afford to feed their kids and eat food. My mum and sister are both NHS nurses, and they're not wealthy. But they can afford to eat, and every nurse that they know can afford to eat. So there may well be examples.
All right, I tell you what, we'll take people not being able to eat off the table.
Yeah.
Public service workers, especially emergency service workers, have seen real-term pay cuts far greater than lots of other areas, and have, in many cases, since the last financial crisis. Is that the behaviour of responsible government that is supposed to be maintaining those people's living standards? I would argue no, and that is where I think the pushback needs to come. People should not be going on strike, but I do think that the general public should be taking a much firmer look, actually, at the pay and conditions of things like firefighters, like police officers, and then saying at the ballot box, why is the government not allowing these professions to, live to the standard that they expect? Why are they underfunding them when it comes to things like equipment? Do these people deserve my vote? Actually, are they really scroungers? Are they really all socialists who want to go on strike? Or actually, is this about public safety?
And that's the key thing, isn't it? When you have widespread strike action like it's taking place at the moment across the public sector, and in fact some parts of the private sector as well, now you can conclude that, this is all kind of highly coordinated and all of these workers have been politicised, they're all militants and they all want to bring down the government and that kind of thing. Or you can say, look, actually, the reality is what's going on is a reflection of the economic landscape, that people who usually wouldn't dream of taking strike action feel suddenly that they've been driven to take strike action because we're in the worst pay squeeze in Britain since Napoleonic times, because people see that there are some people who did very well out of the pandemic and made many, many millions, and they're being told to pay for another economic crisis that they didn't create. So
Is it? So you're telling me
look
you're
at the
going on...
backdrop
Are you telling me...
and the motivation behind it and understand why it is that people are taking action.
Are you
that they
telling
wouldn't
me
normally do.
you voted to take strike action because you're looking at the pandemic and going, there's some people over there that made a small fortune?
No, one of my motivations was certainly the fact that we've got a broken economic model, an economic model that is unfair, and that the gap between rich and poor, with some people doing very, very nicely, executive pay going up, city bonuses going up, some of our big corporations...
But again, I was going to say,
some of our big corporations recording record profits.
But that's not specifically
and people
about
like me
your
being
working
told,
conditions.
But you can't have any more. Of course that's going to be in people's minds.
But this is the thing, that's not so much about your working conditions and safety, that's more a political thing, and you should take that to the ballot box. That would be my argument.
There's absolutely nothing wrong with any worker who's been offered a pay increase that is not acceptable, a below inflation pay increase, saying, well, hold on a second, not only is that unfair, but let me look at the wider economy. Some people at the top are doing really, really nicely, and I'm being told to tighten my belt. I don't think it's unreasonable at all for people to take that into account when they make that judgment.
I think they can take that into account when it comes to their worldview, but other members of the taxpayer who don't get a say on whether or not they can withdraw their funds on this are going to be sat there going, so I'm not necessarily going to be getting the service that I'm paid for. You can make the arguments about whether or not the service is being run effectively, whether or not it's being funded, and I'm very sympathetic to those arguments. But I think a lot of taxpayers would sit there, and when I say taxpayers, I mean the general public, and going, well, hang on, I don't get a say about whether or not I keep on contributing to the system. Why can you just pull out of the system? It doesn't really work. Take it to the ballot box, which is what I would say should be your recourse on this particular issue.
We can't take it to the ballot box yet, but we can take it to a break. I could carry on this conversation for a very long time. I want to be absolutely clear. I respect Paul and people like Paul that put themselves into danger immensely. I don't have it in me to do that job, so much respect to those people that do, and I want them to be paid well, but I do think public safety, health and safety, comes above individuals' pay. Am I wrong? Give me your thoughts. We had a passionate argument there from Paul about his position. gbviews@gbnews.uk is the email address. Going to take a quick break. When I come back, I want to ask you a very simple question. Should the UK be sending fighter jets to Ukraine? See you in 2.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back. Eamon Holmes, back on the TV
Surprised
with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes.
Oh, good.
Already to bless.
Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dewbs and Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Dewbs and Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, I'm Michelle Dewberry with you until 7 o'clock tonight. Alongside me, the political commentator Benedict Spence and the author, fireman and trade unionist Paul Embry. We've just been continuing that conversation in the break about whether or not it would be practical, feasible, realistic, whatever words you want to give to it, to have clauses in the contracts of emergency services which basically says that you cannot go on strike. Just to explain very briefly, Paul, because we have these independent peer review bodies in various different sectors. It's not quite like that with firefighters, is it? Just tell people briefly how it works.
We have a body called the National Joint Council, which is a UK-wide body responsible for negotiating the pay and conditions of firefighters, made up of senior officials of the Fire Brigades Union and senior representatives of fire service employers, and every year they get together and negotiate what that year's annual pay increase will be. So completely different from a pay review body, and much better from our point of view than a pay review body, because it gives us some leverage in those negotiations.
Well, there you go. That clears it up indeed. Let's have a look what you guys at home are saying. Neil says, these strikes are political. I earn less than the people going on strike, and yet I manage not to go to food banks, etc. We all want more, but we have to live accordingly. Nick says, I do not support a raise for firefighters. Although their job has risks, they go into it knowing that they are more than compensated with pensions and benefits. As a compromise, would you take a reduction on your pension and have it applied to your pay or not?
No, because pensions themselves are deferred wages, and actually in the fire service it's one of the most expensive pensions for contributors like firefighters. So I think it'd be unreasonable to say we're going to give you a decent pay increase, but hey, we're going to whack it off your pension. I don't think we'll come up for that, to be honest.
So that's a no to that suggestion is the short answer. Right. Do you support the firefighters going on strike? Is there people out there, or are there people out there, should I say, that do support that? I certainly support fair wages, but the concept of emergency striking is a step too far for me. Anyway, give us your thoughts, but let's for now talk about Boris Johnson, shall we? He never seems to be off the news press, does he, this fella? He's not supposed to be Prime Minister anymore or that influential, but he likes the sound of his own voice, particularly when it comes to Ukraine. Long story short, he's now been suggesting, Benedict, that the UK should push ahead and supply fighter jets to Ukraine. Should we?
This is a complex one because the argument that's always put forward as to why we shouldn't is it's escalation and that we risk upsetting Russia, that they might interpret it as NATO getting involved in the war in Ukraine. And I think that given that we've already given them pretty much everything except submarine ships and aircraft, and they haven't actually launched an attack on London, I think we can probably take it that no, they are not going to take it as a sign of NATO aggression. They already understand that NATO backs Ukraine up to a point, or certain members do, but NATO is not about to get involved. To that end, I don't see that there's anything wrong with sending planes. That's not going to cause an escalation. Well, no, we might not. Well, we shouldn't put boots on the ground because those are actual participants. It's not an inanimate object, which fundamentally a jet is until you actually put a Ukrainian inside it and then it flies. The issue for me is not so much around whether or not there is moral rectitude in sending planes to Ukraine. They aren't particularly useful in Ukraine because there is no air superiority because the Russian military is set up to counter NATO air superiority. It's very good at shooting planes down, but the Russians don't have a particularly good air force anyway. What they need is long-distance ballistics and more tanks. What this is actually more about, I think, is whether or not the British Army has the capacity to send planes to another country. Our military is actually pretty badly funded at the moment. It's not in a good state to go to war. If we have the planes to be sending overseas, that means we're going to have to find more money somewhere to buy better planes for us to have here, and we will need them at some stage. There is this idea that as long as we're not going on some sort of US-led intervention somewhere in the Middle East, we're not going to have to intervene anywhere. And that is a fool's errand, as the Ukrainians are now finding out, that you can just assume that the world will stay the same forever. It won't be like that. We do need a functioning air force, and right now it's questionable whether actually we have one.
Indeed, Paul Embry.
I mean, I think Benedict raised a key point there about the fact that our own armed forces have been pretty much ravaged in recent years and cut to the bone, and we've been having the discussion about other public services as well, the state of the economy, the fact that other sectors in the public sector have been run down and degraded in terms of their ability and resources and stuff. And yet, isn't it funny how whenever it comes to a military adventure, we can always summon up billions of pounds at the drop of a hat and say, yeah, we're going to get involved in that, whether it's Iraq, whether it's Afghanistan, whether it's Ukraine. And by the way, I think the invasion was appalling. I think Putin's invasion was barbaric, and I condemn it unreservedly. But I think we have to ask ourselves, look, is it our role to constantly play the policeman of the world? I don't think we're big enough, and I don't think we're rich enough to play that role, to be perfectly blunt. My other question, what is the end game here? You know, this war is now, this conflict has been going on for 12 months, arguably for longer than that, probably back to 2014 if you look at the whole history of this dispute. I've been hearing for several months now that Russia's about to bow out, that Russia's on its knees, that Russia's going to collapse. That doesn't look like happening anytime soon. And it seems to me that actually what we need are a few people, a few less hawks and perhaps a few more doves. And that's not to say that we give in to Putin, but at least, you know, let's start talking the language of peace. And it seems to me that there are so many people in government and in the media and in the military who are kind of up in the ante constantly and stoking the flames of this dispute, and not enough people saying, look, there are lives being lost. This is a war of attrition. There are women and children being killed on a daily basis. How are we going to address this? Whether that's the Minsk Accords, which perhaps need to be revisited in terms of trying to deliver a peaceful settlement, or some other way, we need to start talking that language.
Yeah, and some people would say, Benedict, rather than sending jets or ballistic missiles or whatever it is, why don't we send negotiators? If you want to send anything, send peace negotiators.
Why?
To try and wrap this thing up.
Russia is not going to stop until it meets its military objectives in Ukraine. It's not interested in negotiating. It wants Ukraine to become a puppet state of Russia. It doesn't want to occupy all of Ukraine. That's not going to happen. It wants to turn Ukraine into a rump state, which, let's be clear, is actually what the US and EU wanted fundamentally to happen to Ukraine in reverse. This is about a power struggle. Two places that believe they have a claim on the wealth of this country, which is vast. That is why we're going into this, because Ukraine is an incredibly important economic country. And, you know, we can turn around and say, let's send peace negotiators in. If Russia has made it very clear that it intends to militarily take the land bridge linking Crimea to the west of Russia, and it intends to take the Donbass and Luhansk regions, and that those are its aims, and Ukraine says, no, that's our sovereign territory, well, then you have the stalemate, and you will have a war there until both sides have worn each other out or until one side is defeated. That's the reality of the situation.
Wow, where do you stand on it? Again, so many of these topics, I could spend my entire Friday night sitting with you two gents, going into these topics a little bit deeper, but for time reasons, I do have to move on. Paul, I've got two comments to read out to you. Paul says, I absolutely support the firefighters. They should be given the pay rises that they ask for. However, this one, and I will confess, Jeff, you're on the screen, you made me have goosebumps. You say the following. On November 2002, on the first day of the firemen's strike, my son died in a house fire. Would he have survived if professional firefighters had attended? ? We shall never know, but be in no doubt that striking firemen can cost lives. Do you want to respond very briefly to that?
Well, only to say, I mean, of course, it's an appalling situation for any family to find themselves in. And obviously your heart goes out to people in that position. All I would say is, as I said at the beginning of the discussion, never underestimate the fact that firefighters themselves feel intense anxiety and anguish when they withdraw their labour, and only ever do it if they genuinely feel they've got a legitimate cause.
Wow.
I can say that as a firefighter of 25 years. We've only ever done that when we feel that the cause is right.
But the people I see on the picket lines don't seem that anguished and distressed. They look like they're having a right old jolly time on their picket lines. But look, you know what? We agree to disagree. That's what this show is all about. But Jeff, we are all united in passing on our sympathies for your loss of your son. What an awful story that is. Going to take a quick break. When I come back, I'll have some more of your thoughts. Don't go anywhere. I'll see you in 2.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pearce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion, and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Friday evening, isn't it? I'm Michelle Dewbs keeping you company. Not for much longer, because it's almost 7 o'clock. So I thought I would do something a little bit different tonight, given that it is Friday, because there's a particular story. I'm handing these out to my wonderful panel. There's a particular story that really caught my eye this weekend, and I don't know whether or not you saw it. It's about a song that many of us might have knocked out once or twice at a little bit of karaoke. I can certainly put my hands up and say that I have. That has now been forbidden from being sung anymore by the choir at the Welsh, how do you say it, Principality Stadium. This is all about the song Delilah, as it's known. Why? Apparently, Tom Jones, of course, was the man that sang it. Apparently now it's risen concerns that it's all about domestic violence. I've got it with us, chaps. Shall we just remind the audience of the song?
Oh,
You're
should
kidding.
we? No, I'm not
They'll all
kidding.
switch off if I sing.
No, they
I'm
won't.
sure you.
No, you won't.
I
Right.
think you should do a solo. 'cause
Should we
I've heard-
just...
I've heard
Right.
your voice.
We'll join in for the chorus.
Let's just do the chorus then. Are you ready?
You first.
Right.
You first. You're doing it on your own.
OK, so what we'll do is we'll just remind you all of the song and then we can discuss whether or not it should be banned. Are you ready, you three? Right, 3, 2, 1, let's just do the chorus. They've got the lyrics, because I thought to myself they won't sing, because they'll say they haven't got the lyrics. You ready?
Go.
My Delilah. Come on at home. Why, Delilah? Now, I put it to you that is pretty much the only part of the song that anybody knows,
sings.
because it goes on and it goes on and it goes on, and you cannot remember even the tune, let alone the words. But long story short, the song is all about this fella. He drives up to his girlfriend's house, looks through the window, she's with another guy. When he comes out, the guy leaves, and the man kills Delilah. He stabs her, basically. So, yeah, they can't sing it anymore. What do you think to this, Paul Embry?
It's just one of these crackpot stories, isn't it, that do the rounds from time to time, where people jump on a particular bandwagon.
We've got a beers and a Prosecco's in, by the way, for this particular segment.
I saw, by the way, I think the Chief Constable of David Powys Police Force in Wales was on Twitter yesterday defending it, saying why it's right that it should be banned. And you just think to yourself, well, OK, where does that end then? Because if you're saying that any song that contains lyrics about violence and death and, whatever, and, some of it is pretty gory. I think we would probably accept that.
But nobody even knows the full song.
Well, that's probably true. But when you look also at opera, when you look at certain national anthems, when you look at rap music, when you look at poems, an enormous number contain, lyrics and verses about violence and death. Do we go on this slippery slope where we end up banning every one of them? No, of course we don't. In which case, why are we targeting...
Games,
yes.
Why are we going to Tom Jones?
If we want to go through all the other sort of the teams that'll play in the Six Nations, I mean, the Scottish national anthem is all about beating the English in war. I know they go on a lot about that. It only happened once or twice, but still, that's not exactly a safe topic, is it? The English, they sing "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot," which is technically cultural.
Do you want to sing it for us?
No, I don't want to submit everybody to that. But that's a slave song from the Deep South. They used to sing that on the plantations. Isn't that cultural appropriation? Shouldn't that be banned? Of course not. But I'm sure somebody will argue for it. You can always find reasons why something has got to be banned or somebody will be offended. The New Zealand national team do an actual war dance before they play rugby. Is that particularly, OK? Is that fair? I don't know.
Well,
but
ones
we
that have
accept
been
it.
flagged, Summer Nights from Greece. Tell me more, tell me more. Did she put up a fight? Apparently that's not
Well, there was
something
the one a couple of years ago where radio stations were told not to play.
I was just about to say, we could go... Right, do you know what?
They were told not
Look
to
at the
play
time,
Baby It's
everyone.
Cold Outside, the Christmas song, because somebody said,
Right, the
it's
world has
offensive to
gone
women,
mad.
it's
Darren
aggressive.
says, do not give up the day job, you three. On that note, we're going to sing you out. We've only got 15 seconds. One for the road. You ready? my Delilah. Have a good
Give it
weekend.
the wrong moment.
Why?
Good evening, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update. This weekend will go from mild and cloudy to a bit colder, but a lot sunnier by Sunday. Most of us will be dry for much of the weekend, but there will be some rain around tomorrow from this weather front that's slowly but surely approaching. We've got high pressure dominating though, and in between these two weather fronts we've got at the moment quite a lot of mild air, so not too chilly out there for a February evening. A lot of cloud keeping those temperatures up. Some drizzle from that cloud in western areas over coasts and hills, and there's some rain this evening over Shetland, but even that should be easing off as we head towards dawn. A few breaks in the cloud could lead temperatures in the east to drop maybe to 4 or 5 Celsius, but for most we'll stay up at 7 or 8 Celsius, so a pretty mild start to Saturday. A fairly drab start to Saturday as well, a lot of cloud around. But again, apart from a bit of drizzle, most places dry until that weather front arrives, bringing rain into northwest Scotland by lunchtime, trickling down through the central belt early afternoon and spreading across Northern Ireland too. Not a great day across the highlands of Scotland, quite wet and windy here, but elsewhere, further south, most of England and Wales dry. A lot of cloud, but some brightness coming through, and it will be mild, double digits for most. Some of that rain will push into northern England and Wales during Saturday evening, so bear that in mind if you're heading out to that band of rain. Working southwards and